Radio Lawrence. Hey, you found it. This is the Radio Lawrence podcast where we discuss local art, politics, and community. Thanks for joining us as we host conversations with the people that make up the fabric of our town. Our guest today requires no introduction, but I would be remiss if I didn't give him the best one I can muster. As the founder of some of Lawrence's most iconic institutions, he's made his mark on our town in an enduring manner. His award-winning eateries have become staples of downtown, and from his East Side bottling facility, he exports the taste of Lawrence all over the Midwest. Welcome to the show, the Grains King of Lawrence, Chuck Magerl. Chuck, glad to have you here.
Hey, thank you. I'm looking forward to a great conversation.
Me too. I'm so excited, man. I just am a huge fan of Free State Brewery. I'm a huge fan of Wheatfields, and I'm just really looking forward to talking with you because I know you're a man with a story to tell.
Well, it's easy in this community to have a lot of stories, and if you spend enough years walking the streets and hanging out in the cafes and the locations around town, you're going to pick up a lot more.
You've been here for a good chunk of time, huh? At least 50 years.
Yeah, I came to KU as a pre-med biology student and got distracted for a short while, and at that point, well, I had a background in the grocery business. My grandfather ran a small grocery store in the west side of Kansas City, Missouri. And so probably from the age of about 7, perhaps on, I was familiar with the back rooms of small groceries. And then there was a movement afoot at that point, and a group of us got together and started a food co-op that has eventually become known as the Merc. And so that was an early on transition into the food and the politics and the social and the cultural aspects of Lawrence.
What is your Merc member number?
I believe that's a good question. I mean, I'm pretty sure it's in the single digit. If not that, maybe it's 17, somewhere in that range.
Incredible. And what year was that you began?
I'm going to say it was 1975, probably. And so, we started out really as basically a buying club that was in the back room of another company that was just called the Mercantile, and it was in the 700 block of Mass. And then eventually, the Mercantile had some financial difficulties. A group of us organized and bought it out as a co-op and ran it as a co-op there, and then went down to the 600 block of Mass, and eventually over to the old Turner grocery store at 7th and Main. And it's moved around a few times over the years, but it's always had a lot of focus on quality food and a social edge and a social interaction that's part and parcel of that organization and represents Lawrence well.
So you grew up in Kansas City. You went to college at KU, but you also did a little stint at University of California, Davis, where you studied pre-med biology and civil engineering and water resource management.
Well, both of those studies were actually here in Lawrence. My UC Davis was in relation to brewing, but yes, civil engineering, water resource management, and then certainly pre-med biology. And really, I feel like those are indicators of I haven't varied from that. I haven't strayed far from that. I believe that what we do with beer and what we do with brewing in the community has a large component of both a healing water, I suppose I would say, yeah.
Let's start the Free State beer discussion with the fact that you come from a line of brewers, one of which might be considered a civilly disobedient brewer.
Well, I mean, this is one of the aspects that had different responses within the family, meaning, yes, my grandfather was in Leavenworth when my dad was born.
In the penitentiary,
yes,
not in the town.
Not in the town. He was incarcerated in Leavenworth during Prohibition years because he was selling alcohol, and that was deemed an affront to the society at that point. And so there were aspects of that within the family that continued to have polarization factors in there. But yes, my grandfather got out of Leavenworth, and some of his buddies bankrolled him to start a small grocery store on the west side. It was primarily at that point it was a Slavic neighborhood, and associated with the Armor and the Swift and the meatpacking plants that were in the West Bottoms area. And eventually it became a Hispanic Our Lady of Guadalupe parish area. Mm-hmm. And, my grandfather kept that store in operation for decades and decades. And that's where I got my first taste of being in business.
Incredible. So I had been doing some research on your history, and I didn't make the connection that it was the same individual. The same grandfather was both the brewer and the grocer. I was envisioning two different grandfathers.
No, that's actually the reality of it. Coming from kind of what I'm going to say, as a working class background, I never actually knew my other grandfather. He was worked for the railroad and was killed in a rail yard accident well before the years that I was born. So
wow, that is really, really interesting. So your grandfather is a Prohibition era brewer, and then he gets out, becomes a grocer, and then you had your own battle with Prohibition era policies, and you were actually instrumental in changing the Kansas laws to allow alcohol sales on site at a brewing facility. Let's talk a little bit about what your role was there. What were the laws like prior to the mid 80s, and what did you do to change that?
Well, Kansas was the first state in the nation to have a constitutional prohibition, and that was in 1880. But there had been plenty of breweries in Kansas prior to that time because we had a lot of German settlement. And so there were probably 110, 120 breweries in Kansas prior to 1880. And some of those continued and lingered on even after Prohibition came along, some of them for as long as 20 years. And there were aspects of that were indicative of kind of, I'm going to say, local jurisdictions that supported businesses even if they were not in compliance with the state law. There were breweries up in Leavenworth that continued to violate the state law, and every year they were hauled into court and they were charged with violating the law. And as long as they paid their fine, they went back to business until they were charged again the following year. So, the locals had created their own method of assuring the continuation of their culture and the things that they valued, and part of the value was just beer as a everyday beverage. There was a real strong distinction at that point between beer and hard alcohol, and beer was seen as being the product of moderation, and hard alcohol was what you'd find in the saloons in Dodge City. So there were, kind of some distinctions being made already at that point in the 1880s, 1890s.
Drunks and miscreants drink liquor. Civilized gentlemen drink beer.
Well, in some ways, when the local brewery, Walrus Brewery, which is near where Lawrence Memorial Hospital is right now, Walrus went out of business because of Prohibition, and he reopened selling the celebrated stomach invigorator, and you had to go to the pharmacy to buy it. But on the bottle, it advised that you keep it well chilled and that you have one glass before dinner and one glass before retiring to bed. And so it was seen as being an indicator of a healthy beverage and a moderate consumption. And really, I think that level of wisdom still holds true today for the most part. So I'm appreciative of what John Walrus did. And actually, it was doing research for an article about Walrus Brewery in the mid-'70s that really prompted me to wonder why we had those breweries then, and what had changed and what potentially could change again.
What were you researching an article for?
I was writing there was a local publication that was an intermittent one that we had here in Lawrence. It was called Public Notice. And so it was a community newspaper that we would put out. I would say randomly. I wouldn't even claim that there was any particular sequence to it, meaning it may have come out once every 3 weeks. It may have come up once every 5 weeks. It just depended upon how frequently we were able to gather enough information and frankly, a few ads to help pay for putting this publication out. So it was a publication that had a lot of community interest approach to it. Had things having to do with issues of the day, nuclear power, People's Energy Project, alternative energy, sexual liberation questions, the aspects that were really roiling our community at that point, and was getting representation in print when it wasn't getting representation in the main community newspaper.
So you're doing research for this article, and your gears start turning on why are Kansas's liquor laws the way that they are? How does this all work out? Because obviously this is well after Prohibition has ended. And so first describe for me a little bit, what were Kansas liquor laws like for an aspiring brewer circa 1985?
Well, certainly there was no ability for someone to produce a beverage and sell it to a consumer. So that's going to be the main distinction. By the time, there were some big changes that happened big changes. There were moderate changes that happened in Kansas liquor in the late 1940s. And primarily that came as a result of the men that had been fighting World War II in Europe and came back and were recognizing that there were attributes that they discovered in Europe and aspects of culture and community that they regretted that were not possible here in Kansas because of our dogmatic aspect of Prohibition. Now, having said that about Prohibition, and we think of Carrie Nation as being the iconic Prohibition symbol of Kansas, but the reality was Carrie Nation came about, her main activity was 20, 30 years into Prohibition. Her media approach was basically trying to point out that Kansas was ignoring Prohibition and that the laws that were written were actually not being enforced. And that's why she got very demonstrative about it. Now,
having put it mildly.
Yeah. Having said that, really, part of the issue and the issues that drove Prohibition were very real. And it was not uncommon for men to leave their families destitute because they had issues with substance abuse. And so as a result, they were over-consuming. They were leaving their wife and children with nothing for any resources to live on. And really, Kansas at that point had the choice, to my mind, of going two different directions. One, to liberalize divorce laws that would then say that a woman has a right to leave a situation that is leaving her destitute. Or we could say that the problem is the substance and we have to get rid of the substance. Well, we've come to realize that Prohibition is generally not a favorable approach to most issues. The human behavior issues are a lot more nuanced and are a lot more demanding of our attention and our wisdom rather than the just say no approach. And the just say no approach generally has not worked.
So in Kansas, in 85-ish, you're not allowed to create an alcoholic beverage and sell it to a customer there at your point of brewing, of distilling. Was distilling allowed in the state at that time?
Well, to a certain extent, yeah. We've got a place up in Atchison, Kansas, for instance. I'm not sure what its current name is. We've always called it Midwest Solvents, but maybe it's Midwest Grain Products, or they've had multiple names. But they have done distilling up there in that, on an industrial scale and mostly for industrial use. But yes, they've had distilling that's gone on up there in Atchison for quite some time. One of the things that was happening right at that point in the 80s was in Kansas, we had just changed, or we just voted to change the overall liquor laws, meaning prior to that time, if you were at a restaurant in Lawrence or a restaurant in Overland Park or Topeka, and you wanted to have a glass of beer or a glass of wine with your meal, you had to be a member of a private club at that location in order to have that glass of alcohol. And so that was putting a real damper on a lot of, particularly with a lot of restaurants. That's why at that point, the only good restaurants in the KC metro area were on the Missouri side of the line because they had the more accommodating aspect of alcohol service. So that there was a vote in the mid-'80s to allow a liberalization of liquor laws and we went to what was called liquor by the drink rather than the private club approach. There were extreme examples of that. We had an attorney general named Vern Miller who gained national attention because he was raiding airlines and saying that airlines are not allowed to serve alcohol as they were over the Kansas airspace because that was a violation of Kansas liquor laws. Certainly the same sort of thing with any train traffic or anything that transited through Kansas. So in some ways, as people realized the severity of those laws, it gave the opportunity for more moderate approach to come into play. And so I saw that starting to happen. And, I had already done the research having to do with the Walworth Brewery, and I had watched a couple of small breweries, primarily in California, start to open up. And I realized here was an opportunity for to make a change in the state law that would fit in and blend nicely with the other changes that we were doing at the same time. It was a bit of a challenge for me because I had gone back to school. I was in civil engineering, and I was, on a pathway to take a more conventional job approach. And so when I actually had to tell my advisor in civil engineering that I wasn't going to represent KU at a regional competition because I was dropping out of school, it was a bit of an inflammatory statement on my part and an affront to him. But that's where I decided that it was something that someone was going to do. I had a sense of how it could happen, and I was ready to make it happen.
And so you personally were spending time at the State House. I mean, were you like sleeping on the steps or lobbying? What was your actual tangible role in this process?
No, you're absolutely correct. I was the one person, and I was a one-person lobbying effort. And the beauty of being in a small state like Kansas was, and to a certain extent still is, that you can have a personal impact on people. And so I was able to actually walk the hallways up there and lay information down at senators and representatives' desks and say, here's what we'd like to do, and here's how we see it happening. And so it was a possibility to have that personal connection without having to buy a lobbyist to work that angle. And it was fortuitous because I had a local state senator, Whit Winter, who saw what was being proposed, liked what he was seeing with the idea, and decided he was going to try to help out, and he was going to introduce me to the proper individuals. Senator Ed Riley out of Leavenworth was the head of one of the key committees, and so we'd speak and have a discussion and say, okay, let's see what happens with this and move it along. I had opposition. The main opposition was coming primarily from one was Reverend Richard Taylor, who was the head of a group called Kansans for Life at Its Best, who opposed anything having to do with alcohol. And the other opposition was from the wholesalers, lobbyists, who basically didn't want a brewery to be selling directly to the consumer.
You're cutting them out of the loop.
Cutting them out of the loop. So in all fairness, both of them had their own particular agendas and ideas, and the liquor wholesaler lobbyists carried the heaviest weight, but we still managed to make it into the law.
So circa 1989, presumably, since that's when you founded the brewery, these laws changed, and you founded what we now know as Free State Brewery in an old bus depot, right? Tell us about these early years of Free State. What was it like? Did you have a feeling at that time that you were building something that was going to become a local staple and an anchor of Mass Street?
The reality is that that location was, most likely, I'd say probably at number 5 on the list, simply because it was so decrepit. It was outrageous. It really only came about because of a couple of other really important people in this community, and that was Charlie Oldfather and Dave Milstein. And Charlie and Dave had just recently, Charlie had been incredibly important in the local theater community, and Oldfather Studios up at KU got named after him. He was a professor of law at KU. And Dave Milstein had operated Sunflower Outdoor for quite a few years, and the Casbah and some other components of downtown Lawrence already. But Charlie and Dave stepped up to basically rescue the theater that became Liberty Hall, and they were the ones that kept that place alive, did the restoration that was so crucial to the work there, and saw an opportunity with what I was proposing with the brewery to potentially link in with the efforts that they were making at Liberty Hall. And so I sat down in their upper office area at one point, and they said, well, we like this. We're thinking of supporting this, but we want you to be right next door and at the old bus depot. And I just, at that point, just thought, this is literally not even a shell of a building. It's a third of a shell of a building because it was so neglected. But Dave had a great sense of creativity in architecture and in visuals, and was a determined individual. And so basically I signed on with them and said, yeah, we're going to make this thing happen. We're going to make it happen in this rundown block of 600 Mass. And maybe we can make a link between what the Free State Brewery represents and what Liberty Hall represents, and maybe have an alignment here that carries people's spirits in the right fashion.
What were the initial years like? You guys, you envision all of this, and you, it had to be just an incredible amount of work. I mean, from your description of the building, it was just ready to collapse. And so you go through all of this labor. Were you immediately successful and embraced by the community, or was it a longer process to become what you are now?
No, that's a great question, and there's several different answers to that, truly. And one of it, yes, I mean, I was very intimately involved in the construction process as well. I was tying the steel for the concrete floors that are the mezzanine, and active on a daily basis, helping lay the plywood decking on the roof so that we could try to enclose the space. And there was a real sense of sadness, actually, odd to say, that when we opened up, because I felt like I had been part of this incredible circus crew that had been going for quite some time. And now the circus had packed up their end of the show and left town. And in many ways, I just wanted to go with them, and instead I'm here to try to keep the doors open every day and come back around with it. And it was a good response right off the bat. And even to the extent that, yes, legendarily, we did actually run out of beer. And the first thing we did as a supplement was we bought the only keg of Anchor Steam beer in Kansas, and we put that on tap as an option for people. And then when we went through that keg of Anchor Steam, we relied on Michelob to get us through until the next batches of beer were available.
Times were hard.
Well, it's not like, beer is a product that takes time. Mm-hmm. And so as a result, you couldn't just say, oh, we ran out of beer last night, let's mix up another batch. It doesn't work that way. And so there was a challenging transition time that happened early on. But, I think we had some good satisfaction from customers and results. And really the biggest shock to us was that summertime of 1989 was pretty good. And it felt good that we were, engaged in the community, having good interactions and plenty of folks coming in the front door. And then we had we thought, okay, KU's coming back into play. September, it's going to go crazy. And it dropped. And the sales were down, and there was that really sinking sense of, okay, we're 6 months into this, and it's over now. And there was a recognition that we may not have really understood what we were doing in the business end of this. Subsequently, we've come to see that fall off for us in the month of September has been a regular pattern, and that we've come to recognize over the years as people adjust their schedules from summertime leisure, perhaps, to buckling down or paying bills for tuition, paying bills for vacation, things like that. September became a little more of a austere month, and it continues that way.
One of my favorite things about Free State Brewery is that you maintain the same dedication to excellence that you do with your beer, that same dedication is extended to your food. It's maybe easy for a brewery to go, yeah, I don't know, give them a cheeseburger or something. And I feel like everything that I ever eat at Free State is exceptional. You know, you take something like an onion ring. Onion rings are not special. You can get onion rings anywhere. Your onion rings are special. So I guess my two-part question is, first, where does your dedication to quality, exceptional food come from? And is that something that's always been a part of Free State's DNA since the beginning?
You know, I think you're absolutely correct in that. And I'd say a large part of it actually came out of the community mercantile. I mean, we were devoted to not just the aspect of community ownership of a food store, but we were also devoted to the aspect of enhancing people's expectations about what food can mean in their lives, and the quality of food, and the intrinsic aspect of how it connects to the community, how it comes from local growers. Those are things that have always been part of my DNA through the course of this journey. And so that certainly came into play with Free State early on. It's continued to be that way. It certainly came into play with Wheatfields early on. And so that aspect of saying that food is important and is something that we should care about is absolutely embedded. And we've had great people alongside on this journey to keep that effort going. I mean, there's no way any one individual could attempt to control or to pull off what we're doing at Free State or doing at Wheatfields. It really requires a group of people that are saying, yes, this is something that matters. It matters to us personally. It matters to us as a way to serve our community. And it matters to us as a commitment to integrity. If you don't care about what you're doing, it's going to come through. And I think that aspect of care really is a key to, whether I'm going to say it's a key to longevity, who knows? You know, I mean, there ultimately there is nothing that is sustainable. It's all going to disappear. But, you know, at the same time, as we gain that sense of integrity and we understand more about our world and we understand more about our role in the world, that's food plays a big part in that. I don't want to elevate food to the point of saying it's the end all and be all. I think food is, again, another way to link us with our community, to link us with our environment, to link us with our world. And it doesn't have a supreme importance, but it is truly important in how we live our lives.
Oh, there's no way to get to know somebody like sharing a meal with them or sitting down and sharing a beer with them. And so I definitely have to agree with you. And I would even say that perhaps you were a foodie before foodie was a term.
Yeah, I've never embraced that word. I mean, I'm going to say the aspect of set and setting and things like that. I mean, I'm going to say I've had some of the most delicious meals I've ever had out in the backcountry of Utah, sitting over a campfire. You know, I mean, it's not necessarily the character of what's in front of you on the plate. It's a character of what you're engaged in at the moment.
Absolutely. My mom is just a wonderful, wonderful woman. Hi, Mom. I know you're listening. She's a little bit persnickety about places and locations. And you just reminded me of this because there used to be, they've now torn down the entirety of the building, but out on 6th Street, there used to be that gas station that sort of served as an incubator for Tortas Jalisco was in there. And before the Basil Leaf Cafe moved downtown, they were in there. And my parents came to visit, and I'm like, you have to try this food. The lasagna is incredible. This place is a really, really great Italian restaurant. It's in a gas station. And I took them in there, and my mom said, yeah, the food's really good, but why are we eating in a gas station? And that's kind of what you reminded me of. You know, you can have a great meal in the backcountry of Utah. You can have a great meal in a gas station.
You know, I mean, it was fun just a couple of days ago that And part of the thing about downtown Lawrence is there are elements of history if people choose to find them there, and if they choose to recognize and value them. And we had a group in a couple of days ago. It was a high school group out of Fort Scott. They were doing history competition, and they had a competition in Topeka, but they stopped. They were in Lawrence. They had gone out to visit Travis out of the Haskell Cultural Center. They were stopping in Free State Brewery to have lunch, and I, had a chance to visit with all of these were women from the Fort Scott High School, and had a great conversation with them. And I just mentioned, as you're leaving, maybe take a look at this plaque that's right out on the front of our building. It's talking about a guy named John Brown, who was extraordinarily influential in American society and culture and politics. Controversial as hell, yeah. But, the plaque that you're going to read, it's going to talk about something that happened literally 30 feet out in the middle of the street from right where you're standing. This is real. This is what happened here. And there's still a continuity of that can come through in the spirit of Lawrence. That's one of the things I've jokingly referred to. People oftentimes of saying, well, what's with Lawrence? And I said that, one of the unique attributes is that we're one of the very, very few places that was not founded for a commercial purpose, meaning, most places were river crossings or crossroads or ports or something of that sort. They had a commercial, mercantile trade role. Lawrence was founded as a political cause, and that is really, really rare as an origin statement for any place in the United States or the world for that matter. And, jokingly we'll say, well, that's why still it's easier to find a good cause than a good job in Lawrence. But, there's some aspect of that that's truly embedded in our psyche. And for people that choose to look and see that, you can find it around in this community.
Very well said. It's a salient point. With your dedication to a good meal, you have extended that same ethos to, as we've touched on, Wheatfields Bakery down at 9th and Vermont. Tell us the story about how Wheatfields came to be. You and your friend opened this together along with a chef, right?
Yeah, and so a big origin part of this was a fellow named Tom Leonard, and I'd known Tom from the early days of the Merc, and Tom was very, very involved in a lot of really specific food focus. He was the first American to make miso, for instance. He had a whole lot of aspect of fermented foods. Ultimately what we're talking about, whether we're looking at Free State and beer and Wheatfields and bread, we're talking about fermentation. And so, Tom was very focused on sourdough at that point, and he had a small bakery in Salina because he was working with the Land Institute folks in West Jackson and the community that had built around the Land Institute. And at one point, Tom had just said, I think I'm ready to move. And so we put together Wheatfields Bakery as a way to showcase what Tom had developed in sourdough breads. And Charlie Rascal was a chef at Free State at that point, and so we blended all of our backgrounds and expertise and opened up Wheatfields Bakery as a showcase for fermented bread and sourdough and all the aspect of rustic foods that are part and parcel of what's come out of that effort. And it's really a lot of what we deal with in both bread and brewing is the same core ingredient and maybe the same process. It's just a little bit different in the amount of water and a little bit different in the amount of time that goes into it. But it's fermentation up and down the line. We know that fermented foods are of significance to us as humans, whether we're talking about kimchi or sauerkraut or, cheese,
Pickles.
Any of the class. You just think about what fermented food has brought to us as humans and how we decided to try to experiment with that. It's pretty extraordinary, and I'm grateful for the people that took some of those first steps in experimenting. But I haven't figured out quite yet how we put sauerkraut next into the cultural aspect and create an incredible, sauerkraut emporium. I'm not sure we're going to have that same amount of devotion, but I've had a chance. I went to Krauter-Gersheim in the Alsace region of France, which is regarded as the choucroute capital, the sauerkraut capital of the world. There's some fabulous small sauerkraut production facilities there that are just great to visit.
You also have a Reuben bratwurst on your menu at Free State that showcases sauerkraut quite handily. Fermented foods, they don't have to be fancy. They don't have to be minuscule or painted onto a plate. They can add flavor and they can add health and vitality to our lives, and hopefully they add fun. Absolutely. I want to hang on the Wheatfields discussion just a little bit longer. So refresh me, please. What year was this that the three of you were starting Wheatfields?
That's a very good question, and I ought to have that pegged more specifically in my mind. I'm going to say that it was probably right about close to the year 1999, maybe 2000, somewhere right about in there. So it was quite a wonderful process, and we've got this incredible oven at Wheatfields. It is a massive hearth oven. It is just a behemoth. It is a heat retention device. It's wood fired, and at times when we need to do repair, which we've had to do a couple of times over the years, it takes days and days and days for the heat to dissipate out of that oven for us to be able to get inside and do the repair work that's necessary. Because it was made by a company out of Barcelona. We were one of the first people in the U.S. to build an oven like that, and it's a classic European old world. It's the gears that move the hearth on that turntable are something that could have come out of the 1600s. It's medieval in its character, but it's so significant in how it produces great bread.
And it's very much a cornerstone of the building, almost literally. It really stands out there both indoors and outdoors. It is a gorgeous oven.
It's not a facade. When people walk up, that is actually the oven, the working oven that they see coming toward the sidewalk. So it's not an imitation of something that was once real. It's actually real.
And how did you all get into some of the more, I don't want to say niche because that degrades the culture, but some of the more culturally specific aspects of Wheatfields, like having challah on Fridays? I used to have a dear friend who was Jewish, and he would go every Friday to get a loaf of challah, and we would sit pretty regularly, more regularly than we probably should have, and we would drink coffee and eat the most delicious knots of bread. Where does that inspiration or cultural recognition come from?
A lot of that came from the individuals that were key to some of the early foundation of Wheatfields and had brought that idea of, we know that these are classic. We know that these are items that have character and tradition. We can do that. We can learn to have that character. We can learn to have that tradition, and we can learn to represent traditions here and not feel like we're falsely appropriating them or that we are somehow or another just latching onto a trend. And that's part of the aspect that, it's easy to feel like you have to chase trends in order to continue to get attention. But I have the feeling that really that sense of character, that sense of quality is something that has a timeless aspect to it. And so, as you mentioned, products that are, that have reference to other places and other times, I think we have the ability to make sure that those traditions continue.
Beautiful. I don't want to jump around too much topic to topic, but there's just so many topics to cover. So Free State enjoyed, I'm going to estimate it around 20 years of local iconery before you decided that this needed to be more of a regional icon. And was it 2010 that you opened the bottling facility over there?
I should have a lot of these landmarks more firmly linked in my brain, but I don't. I really just kind of follow the aspect of how has life continued.
That's kind of how I got there. I was like, well, I worked at the liquor store when that happened, and I remember being very excited. Free State beer is now available in bottles. And so, yeah, I don't have any historical reference other than my own lived experience.
Well, and a lot of it for us had been that we had a crew that were exceptional in their devotion to beer, in their skill sets, and in their commitment to care and quality. And where can we go to help spread that, give them greater exposure, give them greater opportunity to continue to work their skills. And there's only so much you can do out of a 30-foot storefront on Massachusetts Street. And so that's when the aspect of deciding that we could indeed have the opportunity to create a bottling facility that would allow us to distribute the beers that we were producing to a wider audience and to people that shared that appreciation, because we knew that was something that was we had a greater awareness out there, and hooray for that. So we really recognized that as a way of enhancing the opportunity for the staff that we had to delve deeper into the opportunities within the beer industry. And it certainly was not without its rocky starts. I mean, the devastation of having a fire out there literally weeks before we were getting ready to open was one of the more stunning things that I've endured, really.
There's no planning for that.
Oh, my goodness. I mean, our head brewer, Steve Broad, I can still remember the days of walking through the structure out there after the fire with no power, everything darkened and just coated with soot, and just the really disheartening aspect of trying to say, what do we do here? Do we really attempt to salvage something from this, or do we just say that we've taken a hit and we're down for the punch? But to the attribute of both the staff and my family, it's like the decision was, we're gonna put this back together again, and we're gonna actually make something of this rather than just allow it to defeat us. So
that's kind of a microcosm of Lawrence itself, right? We're not known for letting a burned down building or two dissuade us from carrying on.
In many ways, you're absolutely right. I mean, the phoenix rising from the ashes. I mean, thank goodness we don't have to experience that too many times. But that's built into a lot of our character. And, I mean, that's true. You can look around this town and think of the aspects of places that have come back to life, and it's gratifying to see that.
So tell us a little bit about the specifics of your bottling facility. I've personally actually never been to it. I've walked by on the trail and just scoped it out. But what goes on there? What are its capabilities? What are its limitations? Are you ready to be a nationally distributed beer vendor, or is it at capacity? Tell us about that.
No, those are all very, very good questions. And the reality is for most breweries in the United States, most of the distribution occurs with probably, I think, within about 90 miles of the location. That's really the core aspect of, where most breweries find their greatest response. And so that's, once you get into national distribution, there's a whole lot of aspect of generally getting into things like pasteurization, for instance, for shelf stability. What we produce is a naturally carbonated, fermented, low alcohol beverage, and it does not have preservatives. It's made solely with malted barley, with yeast, with hops. There's no artificial ingredients added to it. And so it is a perishable, fresh product. It's generally going to be best when it's closest to the brew date. It's going to be best when it's closest to the brewery. And so that's one of the things that we've certainly embraced in the course of what we do. And, the aspect of Kansas, this is not the greatest a beer state consumption-wise in the nation. We're not tagged into a great market. We're not a Wisconsin, or we're not a, even a California for that matter. But there's still appreciation for good character and good quality, and that's the work that we continue to do every day. And we love Lawrence as a community, and are so glad to have events and activities associated with what we do at the brewery. And we've got one coming up here very soon that we call Trails That Connect Us, and that is a way to allow people to come see the brewery if they wish to walk around, but also to experience the aspect of what a community really feels like, and people getting out and mingling and being in public. That social aspect is so crucial to our general vitality and our community's health, and that's one of the things that we really enjoy exploring and trying to develop and work with.
You segued smoothly right into the Trails That Connect Us, which was something that I was going to probably less smoothly segue into myself. Let's discuss that a little bit. By the time this airs, the event will have passed because it is in 2 days. But how many times have you done this? What exactly is going on? What is your inspiration? How did this all begin?
Part of it is that we are positioned at the Eastside Brewery, the ESB. It's positioned right along what's currently known as the Burroughs Creek Trail. It's a rails to trail area that people can utilize for bicycling, for walking, for running, for scooters. It's a way. It's a pathway that was originally, well, I'm not going to say it was originally a railroad, because in most instances there were trails that existed prior to that. But the sense that trails are both an avenue for migration, an avenue for interaction, and a metaphor for what happens in our lives as we move, as we continue to move, as we continue to find new and different things around us in our communities. And so the Trails That Connect Us event brings organizations together and allows members of the community to mingle about and have some fabulous music going on, to enjoy some food trucks, to have some good beer, to bicycle up. And we've got a bicycle valet parking service so that people can just pull up and, turn their bikes over and walk around and talk to people and explore things anywhere. Friends of the Caw, the Haskell Cultural Center, the Kansas Trails organization, the Friends of the Lawrence Area Trails, Prairie Park. I mean, we can keep going on and on. The library and Watkins Museum, and an incredible array of organizations, of people in the community who are active in ways of wanting to show people how many resources, how many opportunities, reasons to get out of your house and explore. And that exploration can be as simple as walking pathways through the parks. It can be as far-flung as bicycle packing along the Flint Hills Trail. I mean, there's an incredible opportunity for us to be outdoors, to realize how broad this world is, to recognize where we have knowledge about that, and to recognize where we're completely ignorant still.
Fantastic. It sounds like a great event. I know that I'm planning to walk down there on Thursday, and I'm really looking forward to it. The last question that I have for you in this section of the interview is a total non sequitur, but I felt that I could not let our conversation here pass without discussing it. You and I met because I was out in my yard with Stella decorating our seasonally dressed 12-foot skeleton. And you stopped to offer some words of encouragement. And during that conversation, you told me that when the bottleneck was not yet the bottleneck, it was still known as Off the Wall Hall, that you were involved in building the stage in that building How did you come to be part of that? And regale us with tales of bottleneck days of yore.
Well, it was a fabulous time. And I mean, part of that really, I would say, during the mid-'70s. So, yes, the community Merc was just emerging. We had a lot of cultural and political vitality going on in this community. And there was a lot of desire to create. I'm just going to point blank say we were looking to create an alternative society. We were looking to create an opportunity to show the values that we had for food, for music, for politics, for culture, for sexuality, for aspects that were really driving us on our daily basis. And rather than wait for someone else to come along and serve that market, I guess, it was a matter of let's create and let's build these places and let's make these things happen. And so at that point, I mean, as a ridiculously young man, I created a credit union, which was basically a cooperative savings and loan institution that was part and parcel of the community mercantile for quite a while, and then phased through different versions as well. So, I created a credit union, and then I was involved in this group that was coming out of an entity called McKinney Mason Stringed Instruments. And McKinney Mason Stringed Instruments was looking for not just an area to sell guitars and, the various Mossman guitars that were coming out of Wheatfields and places like that, but to create a performance hall. And so it was at that point, I think we conceived, or we thought it was the old roller rink. I don't know if it was true or not, but it had been a flea market just before we tried to convert it into a music hall. But yeah, that would have been in the fall of 75. And so I had a modest amount of carpentry skills, and we had a ragtag crew that basically was trying to put this whole thing together, and so I was involved in building the stage at Off the Wall Hall, and there were some incredible. I mean, right now we've just gone past the 50th anniversary of that space as a performing music hall, and I really think that's something that needs to be understood and needs to be valued and needs to be cherished. And I'd love to be part of a group that would create an online presence that people could respond and say, yes, I remember when Sun Ra played that venue. I can remember the first time that Jason and the Scorchers played in Lawrence. I can remember, those sort of things that people that provided a vitality and that sense of what is our life about. And music is crucial for what our life is about, and live music is crucial for what our life is about. And it's something that I want to see honored, and I want to see truly recognized as part of our human experience while we're here on this planet. And doggone it, 50 years, there needs to be a banner flying across downtown Lawrence that says 50 years of live music from this spot on New Hampshire Street.
Absolutely. And I would personally love to partake in any sort of recording of an oral history of that building that, if you had people you wanted to refer my way, or that would be a really fun project to discuss at another time. I would love that.
Well, there are certainly key people involved that are still here in Lawrence and that are still alive and that still have some incredible stories to tell. And that's a big part of what I see you doing with this project, is being able to capture some of those stories before they fade and disappear. So that's really important work.
I appreciate that. I don't necessarily consider myself a qualified Lawrence documentarian, historian, or I just really like to talk to people, and I know that there are a lot of people here who have a lot of interesting things to say, and that's sort of how this whole thing began. I thought someone needs to talk to these people. There are a lot of incredible members of our community, and I want to engage with all of them. So I appreciate that. Thank you for your kind words. With that, I have concluded the prepared section of my interview, and this is sort of new. Typically, before an interview, I will make a Facebook post that says, "Hey, I'm interviewing so-and-so. Do you have any questions for them?" And typically, people put a little thumbs up on it, and I haven't gotten a lot of community involvement just yet. We're still building up. When I posted that I was interviewing Chuck Magerl, I received 3 questions through various means. Some were privately sent to me, some were posed on the post itself, but I feel obliged to pass those questions along to you now in what might actually be the inaugural questions from the audience section. David Workman wants to know when you're getting your knees replaced.
David's a very astute observer of human activity and also a great Lawrencian, without a doubt. And he's not shy to poke around in other people's lives, but always with the best of intentions. So I appreciate that, David. Basically, what he's alluding to is that I did serious damage to one of my knees at a backyard volleyball game and vigorously diving to dig something out, and I've suffered the consequences ever since. I'm waiting for there's some amazing medical advances that are going to happen. And I'm sure that will, that will answer any of my pain or.
They're just around the corner.
I've hiked the Grand Canyon with bad knees. So what? Pain is all that you need to remember that you're still alive. So there you have it. Pain's not to be avoided.
Richard Renner wants to know if you have any new ventures or community investments in the works.
We're always coming up with new activities and new components of our engagement with community and new products. I'm carrying around the printer's proof for the new 12-pack container for our Yakumaniac cans. So, once we get that finalized in the next day or two, we're going to have different packages of products going out into the marketplace and certainly, we've got another new beer that's coming out in next month that I'm not going to reveal exactly what it's about, but it's a really wonderful and whimsical new beer that I've got great expectations for. But beyond that, yes, activities. We do these programs called Science on Tap and History on Tap and things that we utilize to try to make sure that people understand there's resources in this community and there's ability to interact with each other. Ultimately, that's what we're looking to do. We're wanting people to feel safe enough to come out in their community and maybe see some strangers and discover that they're not really strangers at all, that they're actually surprising and wonderful human beings, and we're grateful that we're surrounded by them.
Warren Bird says, "Dear Chuck, do you ever have any regrets about not pursuing a career in environmental engineering? I bet you would have made a great activated sludge."
Of course. What's life without questions? So many of us have had pivotal moments in our past, and yes, we have to wonder what would have happened had we chosen that other path. At the same time, there's just so many experiences that I've enjoyed that really I don't have that sense of regret. I was just thinking about the other day, this was years ago, but a great time. I was upstairs at the brewery late afternoon. There was a woman that I had known from previous work named Patty Jenkins, who was a local Lawrence woman who had gone on to direct some pretty important movies. And so I went over and said hi to Patty and talked to her for quite a while. And Patty was really gracious, and she said, hey, Chuck, great to see you. Blah, blah. Here's my friend Steve. And hey, Steve, nice to meet you. And then I turned back around, keep talking to Patty. And I go back to the back of the house, and the staff is hanging there waiting for me, and said, what's he like? What's he like? It's like, who? Steve Perry. What's he like?
Oh, wow.
And I was like, oh, okay, yeah. Oh, you're right. That is Steve Perry, isn't it? So, there's like funny little aspects of how our lives present moments and surprises. And that's something that we really only experience in real life. We don't experience that in virtual reality. We have to get out and be among people that we may be surprised by.
Well, you have presented me with a surprise because this hasn't happened yet. You just spoiled one of my lightning round questions. I'm still going to ask the question because we are now through. We've completed the pre-prepared interview. We've completed community engagement and questions from the audience. This is the final section of the interview. It is the lightning round. And in the lightning round, you're ready to go. I see it chomping at the bit. In the lightning round, I will ask you 10 questions. You can answer in as few or as many words as you see fit. I will not be asking any follow-up questions, and no explanation of any of your answers is necessary if you do not desire. You'll know which question you spoiled when it comes up because it will be apparent. But the first question, are you superstitious?
Absolutely. I mean, if you don't experience the surprises of what happens on a full moon night, you don't experience the surprises of what happens in a wilderness, superstitious, you bet. It only means that I understand that there are experiences out there that are beyond my sensory abilities to comprehend, but that's just my limitations. That's not the world's.
Where's your favorite place in town that you don't own for carryout?
This may come back around to that sense of community again, and I'm not going to say it's the most, it's not the foodie choice, but the favorite carryout is going to be that family-owned forever location in North Lawrence of La Trappe. La Trappe is a carryout favorite and has been a go-to place for decades, and I love the feeling of eating there and of carrying out. So yeah,
I know that you work with a large team of folks in the brewery, but I have to assume that you are the propulsion behind a lot of ideas for new concepts. And the lightning round question here is, what is the worst beer idea you've ever had?
And I'm going to start that response by saying we don't expect people to pay for our experiments. In other words, I've been plenty of places where people have said, well, yeah, I know this isn't very good, but I need to sell it. And that is just, I can't abide by that. That's not something that I would accept. I have to admit, this is going to upset some people. But yeah, I'm going to say one of the fan favorites of Crimson Berry Ale was one of the things that I'm like, okay, so we pumped some fruit flavors into a wheat-based beer and decided that it was something to sell. I'm not convinced, and we haven't done that for quite a few years as a result.
What is the best soup?
I think that's something that is, there's so much variety that I experience every day because we at both at Wheatfields and at Free State have a regular cycle of keeping variety of soup in place. But the aspect of a fabulous, flavorful, well-seasoned, whether it's a chicken and noodle soup, whether it's a minestrone, whether it's a beef and barley soup, those are all things that just really, really satisfy me, and I'm appreciative of it.
What's the farthest you've ever traveled from home?
Farthest travel would probably, actually, I suppose that's going to be a question of distance or psyche, I suppose, in some ways, really. I mean,
interesting approach. No one's ever taken that one.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'd say potentially the farthest I've ever traveled from home has been into the canyon lands of Utah. But I've distance-wise traveled farther than that. And I'd say, distance-wise would be in Bavaria in southern Germany, in areas that had some vague family reference of, where my people left and came to this country. So, but again, I think the travel aspect of it, and again, this ties into trails that connect us as well. Travel is not necessarily geographical. The travel can be intellectual. The travel can be spiritual. And I think the canyon lands of Utah may fill that void.
What is your favorite category of beer?
Well, that's going to vary. I mean, quite frankly, we've been enjoying a Copperhead Pale Ale through the course of our conversation here, and that's a fabulous beer. It's so well balanced and fits in so many situations, and has for those of us that know it, it's got a real life background story to it, meaning that Copperhead bite that landed Steve Broad, our brewer, in LMH for a couple of days when his legs swelled up like a football. It was so incredible. And that was the reality of that was we had that beer in the tank. We didn't have a name for it. We just knew it had a copper color and it had a little bit of a hop bite to it. And all of a sudden, Steve's laid up in the hospital, and we've got a name for that beer that fits perfectly. So, I enjoy a variety of beer, but certainly seasonally it will change. Right now, we're coming into something where I just really relish the Gravel City Kolsch that we put out every summer, springtime as we get into the bicycling world. So that's part of it too.
What is one conspiracy theory that you feel has merit?
I will acknowledge a whole lot of conspiracy theories in the sense that I recognize that things are often not as they seem. And so to accept the idea that there may be another answer to what we're seeing and presented to us is I'm willing to entertain some of those. I'm not I don't try to promulgate them, but I'm willing to accept the idea. I like to learn when I'm wrong. I don't like to be told when I'm wrong, but I like to learn when I'm wrong. And so I suppose in some ways conspiracy theories give me the chance to try some of those things out. I know my grandfather was just an absolute kook about the idea that humans never set foot on the moon. That was done somewhere in some Hollywood set. And I remember thinking Grandpa was such a nutcase with that idea. And then probably 15, 20 years later, I saw a video of the moonwalk and went, oh my God, that was really badly done. He may have been right. So just that aspect of, things are often not as they seem. And so conspiracy is a way for us to try to find out what we believe is real and not. And I would say that in the course of current society and AI, particularly video edits and things of that sort, we're going to find challenges in trying to figure out if we understand what's real and what's not.
Brilliant answer. Here we are. Have you ever had any major celebrities in the brewery?
That's been just one of the absolute thrills, and certainly there has been, and so we were talking about Steve Perry earlier, Allen Ginsberg, when he did a poetry reading in the brewery, it was an extraordinary event. Joan Baez was in at one point, and one of our servers got down on his knees and sang to her the Beatles song, When I'm 65, and she was just in tears and laughing with that. And so, yes, there are things like that. I had a chance to meet a guy named Harry Truman, which was pretty extraordinary. I had a chance to sit and talk with Muddy Waters, and that was an important part of my life. But the reality for me is that I get more humanity out of the people that don't have celebrity. I get more humanity out of people that are willing to talk about their lives and are willing to share their lives in ways that celebrities may keep guarded. And so the importance of celebrity is not as significant to me as the importance of communicating with people every day.
What is one defunct Lawrence institution that you would bring back?
And that's a tough one to answer, because in so many ways there's continuity where there's some level of an aspect that moves into the next segment. We just had the trauma in our block of having the beloved Jungle House plant store disappear, when we now know that there's another plant store that's going to transition into that area. And so, what has been ended actually oftentimes engenders the next round, and maybe a slightly more refined and continuity with that. I don't know that I have an easy answer for that, because there's so many things that I've seen come and go over the years that even though I have fondness for them, I'm always looking forward to tomorrow. And so I guess I don't live my life with any sense of loss or regret as much as I think about, what can we do to change the world today?
Final lightning round question. What is one irrational fear that you have?
An irrational fear, God. I think one of the important parts of life is overcoming fear, and so I'm not sure that I've granted a fear a particular hold over my existence. I just rebel against that idea so completely. But at the same time, I don't know. I'm not afraid of snakes or spiders or things of that sort. I suppose the most irrational fear potentially is the experience or the feeling of being buried alive, in the sense that I've found myself in subterranean conditions where I could not see the daylight and had no immediate sense of which way I would look to find daylight. And so, that aspect of losing track of where that source of life and where that source of light is, that's a pretty powerful fear.
Chuck, that's all I've got for you today. I've got to thank you from the bottom of my heart. It has been a genuine pleasure to get to know you a little bit and to share a beer with you here. Thank you for bringing by some beers. I greatly appreciate it. And I can't tell you enough how much I appreciate your contributions to our community and your steadfast dedication to providing us all with delicious foods and beers. Thank you so much. And I would love for you to have the last word. What would you tell the people of Lawrence?
Well, I think really you've kind of made comments to this effect. And I think really, as far as I'm concerned, we're talking about social action. We're talking about cultural interaction. We're talking about community, and we're talking about heart. And I think the phrase that I really value so highly, and I wish we could somehow codify this, is just that reference of saying, "Good to see you. Can I bring you a beer?" And that's something that I hope that we will always hold on to as a part of our humanity. And thank goodness for what we've been able to do here in Lawrence.
Thank you so much, Chuck. Have a great night.
Thank you.